There is a moment, every single night, that most of us waste without knowing it. It happens right after the lights go out. Right after the phone finally goes dark. Right in that thin, quiet space between the day you just lived and the sleep you're about to fall into. Most people call this moment nothing. A gap, a blank, something to be filled with scrolling or worrying, or simply passing out from exhaustion. But I want to tell you something tonight that changed the way I understand that moment forever. That gap is not empty. That gap is a door. And whatever you say standing in that doorway, right before sleep takes you, your mind will carry it downstairs into the basement of who you are, and it will start rearranging the furniture while you're gone. Let me explain what I mean. Think about how you actually talk to yourself, not the version you'd say out loud in a meeting or the polished sentence you'd post online. I mean the real voice, the one that shows up when you make a mistake, when you're tired, when no one's watching. For most of us, that voice is not gentle. It's not even neutral. It's a courtroom, and we are, somehow, always the one on trial. You should have known better. You're falling behind. Everyone else has it figured out. What is wrong with you? We would never let a stranger speak to someone we love that way, and yet we let that voice speak to us every night, uncontested, and then we wonder why we wake up already tired. Here is the strange, almost embarrassing truth about the human mind. It cannot tell the difference between a threat that is happening and a threat that is remembered. When you replay an argument before sleep, your body doesn't know it's over. It responds as if it's still happening. The heart rate rises, the jaw tightens, the breath shortens. You are not resting. You are rehearsing suffering and calling it thinking. So the question becomes, if the mind is going to rehearse something every night, whether you direct it or not, why not choose what it rehearses? This is not positive thinking. I'm not asking you to lie to yourself. I'm asking you to do something much harder, to be honest with yourself, but in the voice of someone who is actually on your side. Here is where it begins. Before you sleep tonight, instead of replaying what went wrong, try asking yourself 3 questions. Not affirmations, questions, because affirmations can be dismissed by a suspicious mind, but a good question, a mind cannot ignore. It has to answer. The first question is this: what did I do today that the version of me from 5 years ago would be proud of? Not the big cinematic wins, the small ones. You got up when you didn't want to. You told the truth when a lie would have been easier. You kept going even though nobody clapped. Find it, name it. Let your mind register it as evidence, because a mind that only collects evidence of failure will, in time, build a permanent case against you. The second question: what did I learn today that I didn't know yesterday? This one matters more than people realize, because it quietly tells your brain something profound that you are still becoming. Not finished, not stuck, becoming. And a mind that believes it's still becoming does not decay the same way a mind that believes it's already finished does. And the third question, the hardest one: what am I ready to let go of so that tomorrow doesn't have to carry it? A grudge or regret, a version of yourself you keep punishing for something that happened years ago. You are allowed to close that file, not because it didn't matter, but because carrying it forever doesn't undo it. It only makes you tired in advance for a day that hasn't even started. Now here is what happens if you actually do this. Not once, not as a novelty, but for 7 nights in a row. The first night it will feel foreign, almost fake. Like you're performing kindness toward yourself instead of feeling it. That's normal. Self-respect is a language most of us were never taught, and every new language feels clumsy in the mouth at first. By the 3rd night, something quieter starts to happen. You start noticing the old voice, the courtroom voice, a half-second before it speaks. And noticing, it is everything. Because the moment you can observe a thought, you are no longer only the thought. You are also the one watching it, and the one watching it has power the thought never had. By the 5th night, your sleep itself begins to change. Not dramatically, but you fall asleep faster, because you're no longer asking your nervous system to process a battle before it can rest. And by the seventh night, something happens that is very hard to describe unless you felt it. You wake up, and for a few seconds, before the day's noise rushes back in you like yourself. Not because life has changed. Life is still exactly as complicated as it was a week ago, but you have changed. Quietly, structurally, the way a house settles differently once you've reinforced its foundation. This is the part almost no one tells you. Transformation rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as a lightning bolt. It arrives as a pattern, repeated until it becomes identity. You don't decide to become someone new in a single dramatic moment. You become someone new the same way you became who you are now, one ordinary night at a time, one sentence at a time, one choice about which voice gets the final word. So tonight, when the lights go out, and you find yourself standing in that doorway between the day and the dark, I want you to remember that you are not powerless there. You are not simply waiting for sleep to take you. You are, in that moment, the last voice your mind hears before it starts filing everything away. Choose to be a voice worth listening to. Because here is the final truth, the one I want you to carry out of this room tonight. You will spend more nights talking to yourself than talking to anyone else on this earth. That relationship, the one between you and your own mind in the dark when no one else is listening, that is the relationship that quietly decides everything else. So don't waste the doorway. Walk through it gently, walk through it honestly, and watch in 7 days who is standing on the other side. Here's the expanded first keynote, no headings, no closing line, just the reflection stretched out into its own space. There is a moment every single night that most of us walk through without ever noticing we've crossed a threshold. It happens right after the lights go out, right after the phone finally goes dark, right in that narrow, quiet space between the day you just lived and the sleep that's about to take you. Most people call this moment nothing, a gap, a blank stretch to be filled with scrolling or worry or simple exhaustion. But that gap is not empty. That gap is a door, and whatever you say while standing in it gets carried downstairs into the basement of who you are, where it quietly rearranges the furniture while you're asleep. We don't think of this moment as powerful because it doesn't look powerful. There's no audience, no stakes. No one grading the sentence you whisper to yourself in the dark, and that's exactly why it matters more than almost anything you say all day. The words you speak to other people are edited, filtered, shaped by who's listening, but the words you speak to yourself in that doorway, right before consciousness lets go, those are unfiltered. They are the version of you that shows up when no one is watching, and the mind treats unfiltered information as more true than anything rehearsed for an audience. Here is the part that most people never stop to consider. The brain doesn't file away your day in the order it happened. It files it away in the order you asterisk and asterisk it. Whatever occupies the final few minutes before sleep becomes the closing argument the mind carries into the night, the last exhibit placed before the jury deliberates. Say something bitter, and the mind deliberates on bitterness for 8 hours. Say something honest and steady, and the mind deliberates on steadiness instead. This is not mysticism, this is architecture. You are, every night, without realizing it, handing your subconscious a blueprint and asking it to build while you're gone. And this is why the loudest days of your life, the days you feel anxious before you've even opened your eyes, the days you wake up already defeated, are so often traceable not to what happened that morning, but to what was left unresolved the night before. The doorway was walked through carelessly. The final sentence was left to the courtroom voice instead of the steady one. So the question worth sitting with tonight isn't complicated, but it is uncomfortable. What have you been handing your mind every night in that doorway without ever choosing to? Here's the second keynote, expanded, no headings, no closing line. Think about how you actually talk to yourself when no one else is around to hear it. Not the composed sentence you'd offer in a meeting, not the caption you'd polish before posting it online. I mean the real, unedited voice that surfaces the moment you make a mistake, the moment you're tired, the moment the room is empty, and there's no performance left to give. For most of us, that voice is not gentle. It isn't even neutral. It's a courtroom fully staffed in permanent session, and somehow we are always the one on trial. You should have known better. You're falling behind. Everyone else has it figured out. What is wrong with you? The verdicts come fast, and they come dressed up as honesty, as if being hard on yourself were the same thing as being truthful with yourself. It rarely is. Most of what that voice says isn't fact. It's fear wearing the robe of a judge, desperate to feel like control by pretending it can prevent future pain through present punishment. Here's what makes this courtroom so dangerous. We would never allow a stranger to speak to someone we love the way we let that inner voice speak to us. If a friend came to us defeated, we wouldn't list their failures back to them in the dark. We'd sit with them. We'd remind them of who they actually are beneath the bad day. And yet we let this internal prosecutor cross-examine us nightly, unchallenged, and then we're surprised when we wake up already exhausted, not from the day ahead, but from the trial we ran ourselves through before we even got there. The unsettling truth about the human mind is that it cannot always distinguish between a threat that is happening and a threat that is simply being remembered, replayed, relitigated. When you lie in the dark rehearsing an old argument or building a case against your own character, your body doesn't know the argument is over. It responds as though it still live. The heartbeat quickens, the jaw sets, the breath shortens and shallows. You are not resting in that moment. You are standing trial again, night after night, and calling the exhaustion that follows just how I am, when really it's just how you've been made to feel by a voice that has never once been asked to justify its verdicts. This is the voice most people go their whole lives without formally meeting. They feel its effects, the tightness, the second guessing, the quiet dread before sleep, without ever turning to look directly at where it's coming from. But a courtroom only holds power over you while you assume the verdict is final. The moment you recognize that voice as a voice, and not as truth itself, something shifts. You stop being only the accused. You become someone capable of asking the room a very different question. Who exactly gave this voice the authority to speak for me in the first place? Here's the third keynote expanded: no headings, no closing line. There is a strange, almost embarrassing truth about the human mind that most of us go our whole lives without confronting directly. It cannot always tell the difference between a threat that is actually happening and a threat that is simply being remembered. To the nervous system, memory and reality often register on the same frequency. When you replay an old argument in the dark, reconstructing every word you should have said, your body doesn't file it under history. It files it under now. The heart rate rises the same way it would if the conflict were unfolding in front of you. The jaw tightens the same way. The breath shortens, the shoulders lift toward the ears. The whole system quietly readies itself for a battle that ended hours, days, sometimes years ago. You are not thinking. You are rehearsing suffering and mistaking the rehearsal for reflection. This matters more than it first appears, because the body cannot tell the difference between rehearsal and reality. But it also cannot tell the difference between rehearsing pain and rehearsing peace. This is not a flaw in our design. It's a door. If the mind is going to relive something every night, whether we direct it or not, then the raw material we feed it before sleep is not a small detail. It is the difference between a nervous system that spends 8 hours in low-grade emergency mode and one that spends 8 hours actually repairing itself. Consider what it means, physiologically, to end a day replaying everything that went wrong. The body treats each replay as a fresh occurrence. Cortisol doesn't know the meeting happened this morning instead of right now. It responds to the story, not the timestamp. And so a person can go to bed having done nothing wrong. That evening, no argument, no crisis, and still wake up depleted, because the body spent the night responding to a story on a loop. A story with no ending, no resolution, just repetition disguised as processing, but the same mechanism works in the other direction. When you deliberately rehearse a moment of competence before sleep, a small kindness you offered, a fear you moved through anyway, a truth you told when silence would have been easier. The body responds to that story too, not with performance or forced positivity, but with a genuine, measurable softening. The breath slows, the shoulders drop, the nervous system registers safety instead of siege. This is why the question is never really, should I think about my day before bed? Of course you will. The mind is built to review. The real question is which version of the day gets to be the one it reviews. The one built from everything unresolved and threatening, or the one built from evidence that you are in fact still capable, still growing, still someone worth defending. The body will believe whichever story you hand it. It has no choice. It only asks that you choose first. Here's the fourth keynote expanded, no headings, no closing line. This is where the shift actually begins, not with a mantra, not with forcing yourself to believe something you don't yet feel, but with a question, because affirmations, however well intentioned, can be dismissed in an instant by a mind that's used to defending itself against disappointment. Tell a tired, skeptical mind, I am enough, and it will often quietly answer back with every piece of evidence to the contrary. But a good question works differently. A mind cannot simply wave a question away. It has to search for an answer, whether it wants to or not, and in that searching, something begins to move. Before sleep, instead of replaying what went wrong, try asking 3 questions, not to perform positivity, but to genuinely audit the day for what the anxious mind so often skips over. The first, what did I do today that the version of me from 5 years ago would be proud of? Not the dramatic wins, not the moments anyone would applaud. The quiet ones. You got up when you didn't want to. You told the truth when a lie would have cost you nothing. You kept moving, even though no one noticed. Find it, name it precisely. Let the mind register it as evidence, because a mind that collects only proof of failure will, over time, build an airtight case against you, and it will use that case every single night unless you start supplying a different set of facts. The second, what did I learn today that I didn't know yesterday? This question carries more weight than it seems to at first, because it tells the brain something quietly profound, that you are still becoming. Not finished, not fixed in place, still in motion. A mind that believes it is still becoming does not decay the way a mind that believes it has already arrived at its final form does. Growth, even in the smallest increments, is proof of life. To a mind that's forgotten, it's allowed to keep changing. And the third, the hardest one, what am I ready to let go of, so tomorrow doesn't have to carry it? A grudge held past its usefulness, a regret replayed so many times it's worn smooth, a version of yourself you keep punishing for something that happened years, sometimes decades, ago. You are allowed to close that file, not because it didn't matter, not because it didn't hurt, but because carrying it forever doesn't undo it. It only makes you tired in advance for a day that hasn't even started yet, spending tomorrow's energy paying interest on yesterday's debt. Repeated for 7 nights, these 3 questions become something more than a routine. They become an architecture, a structure the mind starts building without being told to. The same way a river carves a new path simply by being asked, again and again, to flow somewhere different. You don't announce a new identity into existence. You construct it the same quiet way you built the old one honest sentence at a time, one night after another, until what once felt like a question becomes simply who you are. Here's the 5th keynote expanded, no headings, no closing line. Something quiet and strange starts to happen once you begin practicing this, usually not on the first night, but somewhere around it. The third, you notice the old voice, the courtroom voice, the one that's been cross, examining you for years, a half second before it actually speaks. It's a small thing, almost too subtle to name at first, a flicker, a pause, the faintest sense of watching a familiar sentence form before it fully lands. And that half second, small as it seems, changes everything, because the moment you can observe a thought is the moment you stop being only the thought. For most of our lives, we live fused with our thinking. The thought arrives, and we become it instantly, without gap, without distance. Fear shows up, and we call it truth. A harsh judgment surfaces, and we assume it's simply an accurate report on reality, rather than a reflex, a habit, an old pattern running on autopilot because it once, long ago, kept us safe. We don't examine these thoughts because we've never learned that examining them is even possible. We just live inside them, the way a fish lives inside water, so completely surrounded by it that we forget it's even there. But awareness breaks that fusion. The instant you notice a thought instead of simply being swept along by it, you create a small but real separation between yourself and the pattern. And in that separation lives something the pattern never had: choice. The thought still arrives, old habits don't vanish overnight, and the courtroom voice doesn't go quiet just because you've started listening for it. But now there is a witness in the room. And a witness changes the nature of everything it observes, the same way a person behaves differently once they know they're being watched, except here, remarkably, you are both the one being watched and the one doing the watching. This is not a small trick of psychology. It may be one of the most powerful abilities the human mind possesses, and one of the most neglected. Most people spend their entire lives never once turning around to look at the voice that's been narrating their existence. They assume the narrator is simply them, but you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who can hear it. And that distinction, thin as it sounds, is the difference between being run by a pattern and being free to interrupt one. Interruption doesn't require force. It doesn't require an argument with yourself or a dramatic act of willpower. Sometimes it requires nothing more than a quiet, internal acknowledgement. Asterisk, there's that voice again. Asterisk, nothing more. No debate, just recognition, because a pattern that has been seen loses some of its grip the moment it's no longer operating in the dark. This is how transformation actually begins, not with a battle against the old self, but with the simple, steady discipline of becoming someone who notices before reacting, someone who watches before believing, someone who has finally turned around to meet the voice that's been speaking all along. Here's the sixth keynote, expanded, no headings, no closing line. There is a fact about your life that's easy to overlook simply because it's so constant it becomes invisible. You will spend more hours talking to yourself than talking to anyone else who has ever lived. More than your parents, more than your closest friend, more than the person you love most in the world. Every relationship you'll ever have runs quietly underneath a much older relationship, the one between you and your own mind, conducted mostly in silence, mostly in the dark, mostly when no one else is listening, and somehow this is the relationship we tend to and nurture the least. We spend years learning how to communicate with others. We study their moods, adjust our tone, choose our words carefully when something matters. We apologize when we've been harsh. We make repairs when trust has been damaged. We understand instinctively that a relationship left unattended will eventually erode. And yet, with ourselves, we allow a level of neglect and even cruelty we would never tolerate directed at someone we care about. We speak to ourselves in the dark the way we would never speak to a friend in crisis, and then we wonder why the friendship with our own mind feels so strained, so exhausting, so quietly hostile. This is the relationship that decides everything else, whether we acknowledge it or not. It decides how we interpret a stranger's silence, whether we read it as indifference or as an insult aimed at us personally. It decides how we handle failure, whether a setback becomes information or becomes identity. It decides what kind of partner we believe we deserve, what kind of risks we feel entitled to take, what kind of forgiveness we're willing to extend to the people around us, because we tend to extend to others only the grace we first learned to extend to ourselves. Every external relationship is filtered through this internal one, whether we're aware of the filter or not. And here is what makes the doorway before sleep so significant within all of this. It is one of the very few moments in a day when this relationship is fully exposed, uninterrupted by obligation. Performance or distraction, no one is watching, nothing is being proven. It is simply you and the voice and the choice of what that voice gets to say. Most people never think to treat this moment as sacred because it doesn't look sacred. It looks like nothing. A gap before sleep. But it is, in fact, one of the only places left in modern life where the relationship between a person and their own mind can be quietly, deliberately repaired, one honest sentence at a time, with no audience to perform for and nothing to prove.